So everybody, Steve Napier here. Today I'd like to continue our discussion on the Enneagram, and we'll see where we end up. We last left off with the big puzzle being, does this overlay on the change grid? If so, how, etc. And I told you that it's no easy feat at all. So I want to spend a little bit of time just looking at that in a bit more detail. Why did my screen just do that? First thing I'd like to do is to chat over to everybody a wonderful, simple resource that I found. This comes from the Enneagram Institute, and it is probably the best concise explanation of the Enneagram and what the wings are all about and what the arrows are. And there's also talking about 9 different levels and 3 different subtypes, and there's a bunch of stuff, and in a very nice, concise way. That PDF I just chatted over to everybody just covers it. So I'm sure there's infinitely more detail. And obviously the Enneagram Institute is an educational place. You can see they have events that they're doing, and they offer training programs. So I have no doubt that there are dozens, if not hundreds of hours of coursework one could actually dive into if they really want to do that with Enneagram specifically. Obviously, our motives are nowhere near as robust as that. I just want to know, does it overlay? And if so, how useful is that to us? So let me just share with you that since our last call, Linda and I have been doing a great deal of discussions around our personal Enneagrams and Enneagrams of people that we know. And we've had a few people kind of fill it out, talk about it. And we are finding it very, very interesting, to say the very least. Very interesting, very insightful. I think that it helps to, help manage tension, and that because it adds a third party that gives us kind of a glimpse into a way of understanding each other in a new and different way. So those of you that are really fluent in it, by all means, I'd like you to kind of, share what your thoughts are on that as well. But we're just finding it to be a really, really interesting kind of a pursuit. Now, as I read more and more and more about it, I'm learning more and more about each of the different types and variations, et cetera. I continue to feel more and more that this should overlay, but I'm telling you, I have no idea how. So let me just start by looking at one of the most simple divisions that there are you can make on here, and that's just by looking at 3, 6, and 9. So if we just said 3, 6, and 9 are 3 major locations you want to get to for your kind of Kodak moment of what's going on there. And I'm saying that because, as Denise pointed out last time, the 3, 6, and 9 are kind of like the middle of whatever. What is this called, Denise? It's not called.
It's the center of intelligence.
The center of intelligence, and then this is the center of doing or action. Is that it?
Right.
And down here is the center of relationships,
feeling. The feeling intelligence.
Yeah. And so I said, all right, well, let's just say that there was no more information available to us than just that. Is there a way that you could rotate a circle on the change grid so that peacemaker, achiever, and loyalist would all line up with any area of the change grid we know about? So I do kind of think the achiever has a strong chance of being outgrid.
Outgrid, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that the loyalist tends to be more downgrid. 6 would be further downgrid, and that would mean that the peacemaker would be more upgrid. And that to me feels like I could build that case. Do you guys agree with that? That you could?
So the peacemaker would be directly in the center, yes? Would it be?
Well, again, no, we would have to rotate this because I think we would want the number 3 to be right in power, right? We'd like to say 3 would be pretty much outgrid.
Right.
But I'm going to throw a wrench into that really quick. So, but just that's where I'm thinking, well, 3 would be here. And so then 6 would be relative down grid and 9 would be relative, up grid kind of, if we just rotated and put that equilateral triangle across all the change grid. Now, again, for all I know, it really is just something that lives out grid. So these are still relative positions. But nevertheless, I thought, well, can I at least rotate it and have those 3 make some sense? And I believe the answer is yes. Well, if those are the 3 main ones, that means all the other ones, the other 6, are kind of stopping points along a journey that I might be going on. If I were to say, I'd like to walk through all of the possibilities, meet all of the people in order from me as a 3 into that 4, into that 5, and ending up at that 6. If that's a continuum, I'd like to kind of know what is it that is changing as the continuum progresses. And that I don't mind telling you, I've yet to identify what that one quality could be, but it might be a way of looking at it as well. What would be halfway between head and heart? Because that would be halfway between 4 and 5. What's halfway between head and gut? Halfway between 7 and 8. Well, what about between 1 and 2? Halfway between gut and heart. If we can say these 3 can fall into understandable locations on the change grid, then the rest should fall into place quite easily. Are you guys with me in the world of continuums? That's how it would work?
Yeah, I think that once the context of an experience actually shifts, so does your perspective and the perception as well, because those are 2 perceiving powers. Like this heart, head, immediately I started to think in between that or connected with those would be hand. And when I was learning value science, and the formal name is axiology, they use that metaphorically to talk about the principles of kind of like the path of self-discovery, where you're best positioned to create the greatest net value. And it follows this path of intrinsic, extrinsic, systemic, but metaphorically, they use heart, hand, head, and in that particular order is where you're most likely to create the greatest net value.
That's really interesting, because that means, I think the moment your hands get involved, that feels like an action is being taken.
And that's what it's like, be, do, have. So it's like being from the heart first, and then you put your hands, so you operate externally, and then systemically it's how it connects all together, the 2 of them collectively.
Right.
So you'll be parts of now the system that incubates the behaviors and all those kinds of things. So in value science, they focus on the number of properties, if you will, within each of those dimensions. And so internally, there's infinite amount of properties, and that's why human value is placed there. Yeah. And then you move outwardly. And so externally, there's something called denumerable in mathematics, denumerable possibilities, which means there's no end to it, but it ends eventually. Right. And then systemically, you're either part of the system or you're not. So it has least properties than the other 2.
Interesting. Okay, well, let me throw this to Denise and see if she can add something to this. Has this been talked about in the world of Enneagrams before, Denise?
Yes, Don Rizzo and Russ Hudson actually called the gut center the hand center. So that was one of the
all right then.
There you go.
Yeah. So and that was like in 2004 when I first started working with those 2. But when I look at this, I think to myself, the Enneagram is in the center of the change grid.
Sure.
And it just rotates depending upon which motivation you're using in the moment. So everybody, each one of these types can be in grid and out grid and up grid. And you know what I'm saying? Like
they all have their own way that expresses itself. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Because, you know, let me just go to another little side. So we've got, all right, we have to say that 3 would be out grid. All right. So if I've got 3 over here, I know the motivations here are really more about getting something done, accomplishing something, achieving something, or whatever. And if the 9 then would be up here, well, what are my real goals and objectives when I'm up here? I'm trying.
Well, let me just back up for just a second and say that a 3 is not motivated to accomplish something. They're motivated to be seen as being an achiever and a performer. So that does not mean that they're always achieving and performing. It just means that that's what they use to live their life through. Is that if I look,
I'm glad you said that, because when I see just these descriptors and I see a maverick or a leader, a challenger, I think that's an outgrid energy.
And it is because it's in fear and anger that they operate. You know what I'm saying? So,
and they don't want to show weakness, I guess, is what they're trying to avoid.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean that they aren't completely stressed out.
Right. And so,
So with what Denise just described, with this being in the center, then these motivators, you know, how we talk about on the change grid, the difference between being externally motivated, you're moving up, whereas, or is it out? Or do I have it backwards? Internally motivated and externally motivated are different directions. So that directional pursuit of things, I think, would add to kind of the direction that one moves, right? Right. So if you're externally motivated, that's going to be unique difference in terms of even the neurochemicals that you're experiencing at that time. So that you know, it's going to drive your energy and even your capacity to achieve those things. Because if you're too externally motivated, then the internal, you're not connected to any why, which means it might be short-lived and a huge disappointment.
Right. So again, I guess, are you thinking that's what happens if I'm in the center, or where am I on the grid when I'm doing?
Like if it were inside that green circle, right? And then depending on where how you're motivated in terms of internally or externally, that's what comes to mind for some reason. I'm not articulating it the best, but
yeah. And see, for this, I would need to rotate it for sure, because if the type 8 is the most outgrid of them, then I need to position it so that it's physically the most outgrid, and the others should align.
It doesn't feel right to do it that way. I mean, I think that, and again, I would bow to Denise's perspective on this. I think it does move around. I think it's much more complex than that. I mean, if you look at each of those types has 9 levels.
Yes.
You know, according to Riso Hudson, I mean, the 9 levels of development, all of which I think it's these 9 levels that might connect to the change grid. From the I'm not sure about this. I'm just
talking. But I think you're right, because see, my thought was that when you look at those 9 levels of development, and for everybody, I'm going to chat something over again that I did at the beginning of the call, but just in case you hadn't arrived yet, wait just a second. Move this down here. There we go. What I've just chatted over is the best short summary I found of all this. Well, this idea about the 9 levels says that basically there are 3 unhealthy levels. There's 3, I guess they called them average or whatever, and then there's 3 that are more evolved, or I don't remember what word they used to talk about the probably healthy is what they put in there. And so I think it's really interesting because a healthy whatever, a maverick, might be a very different individual than an unhealthy one. And I thought, well, if we're saying the absolute healthiest of any one of these would be at the center, then those levels would end up being concentric circles going all the way out. So the worst case scenario for each of those levels of development would be in a danger zone. Is that what you were thinking, Kathy?
Yeah, except I'm not even sure that the healthiest levels are in the center. I think they're near the center.
Okay.
I would not, I mean, the center is way too detached from this. So, you know, the center is not, you know, it might be that, you know, it might, I mean, from that diagram, perhaps the center is the center as you're describing it now, as you're placing it now. But yeah, I think it's the 9 levels of development that place along, that correspond in some way to the levels of tension.
Sure.
Or you know, other, or what are, or the descriptors.
Yep.
In that way. And you know, I mean, you could off the top of your head say, yeah, there are descriptors, there's sort of social style descriptors that could correspond to each one of those types in general, in very, very general terms. But I think at the 9, but without corresponding to the 9 levels of development, where I think they look really different based on whether you're at a level 1 or a level 9.
Absolutely.
You know.
Well,
but I haven't analyzed. I mean, I don't know. So this is what we're doing. Yeah.
Well, it'd be interesting to look at that, because one thing that I have kind of learned about the kind of Enneagram community is that many of these things that we've just been talking about ever so superficially are things that are also being debated among the Enneagram, you know, experts or, you know, community. Some are going like, you know, the arrows are very valuable, and others are saying, well, maybe, and some say, no, we all have 2 wings and we use them equally. So I think there's a lot of very interesting explorations going on as they are on this quest for what's the actual answer, because, you know, there's got to be a 1 involved somewhere. So so Denise, is that true that there's a lot of
I like Kathy's description, and I agree with her that, you know, the center is the place where we're heading, but don't want to like sit in the center, or else, you know, we wouldn't be doing anything probably. Yeah. But each one of the types, our goal is to have no type displayed. You know what I'm saying?
Right. We're going to be in the middle, the balance.
Yeah.
Right.
So if we could operate around the center, that would be awesome. That there would be times when I need to pull up my big girl panties and go to action. So I would look over towards my 8 and say, how can I do that? So the 8 would tell me, here's what you do. I'm in control. I can tell you how to do this. So I'm really operating from the information from each one of these types at all times, if I want to.
Right.
And how can we map the spiral dynamics? Because that word development sort of triggered me. So how do we map the spiral dynamics where you develop and then you come back around at a higher consciousness? How do we map that to the change grid? I don't remember.
Well, we mapped it around it, saying that each trip around the spiral, each circuit around the spiral, is going to go from a place of ignorance to awareness to getting it all under control to it becoming more routine. So a new norm is established, and then we go to through this period of unawareness until a new problem arises, and now that's someone starting to pull us up again and again. So it's around and around and around. That mapped very easily to the way that adults like to learn things, adult learning theory. So conscious.
Oh, okay. Is it the same thing than what Denise and Kathy are describing? Is it something akin to that or similar? That
let's just say that comparing the adult learning model and the Enneagram, these are 2 extremes. I think of the adult learning model as being not simplistic, but very simple. It's just trying to illustrate a very simple point in very simple terms. where I look at the Enneagram and I kind of go like, oh no, there's a lifetime of depth to explore with this. So
right, with
anything,
each type being, you know, these 9 levels. So you're always advancing, you know, or you can always advance, or at least there's opportunity to advance even further than you anticipate.
Exactly. Well, and so think of this, you know, mathematically, there are 9 types. Each type has 9 levels. Now we've got 81 possibilities, and they could be the wing to their right. They could be the wing to their left. And so that gives me another double that. And they can also all either be about self-preservation, social or sexual in that. So I don't know how all that math runs, but you end up getting probably in excess of 1,000 possibilities. Denise, do you know how many possibilities there are when you run all of those aspects through it?
I don't know. That's an interesting question.
Yeah, so I'm just going to, it's like it's 9, but these 9 have to be very general by nature, by definition, by necessity, because we're trying to say, when we look at something as complex as a human being, how do we go about simplifying it? Well, maybe we can start by subdividing it into 3 different groups. There are people that operate out of their gut. There are people that operate out of their heart. There are people that operate out of their head. And I can believe that in the hands of you know, a professional speaker, or, you know, a wannabe human development professional, whatever, they could kind of build a whole career and write a book just about that one thing, right? So take one very simple thing and you can build a whole world around it. Well, they said, no, there's more to it than that. And this is the part again that I want to say that it intrigues me, but the more accurate word right now as a 5 is it's tormenting me. So it truly is. And you know, anyone who wants to jump in and be my therapist, you feel free to sort all this out. But you know, I know it's my 5. I know that's that. And you know, I know me. In fact,
I wish I could help you, but I'm a 5 as well. That's
yeah. Well, I want to show you
value science. Dr. Robert Hartman, who's known as the father of axiology, created a mathematical science around that. And if I remember correctly, although they used intrinsic, extrinsic, systemic, he said there's 6.4 quadrillion permutations on how those can map out. And that
means there are more possibilities than there are humans on the planet. Maybe the total number of humans to ever live on the planet. Which
so I'm going to say to you, is a one, I'd say get a life. Get a life.
Right. And as a 5, I can tell you, this is my life. This intrigues me to a point that I derive great joy from having a puzzle like this, because, you know, most of the models that we've looked at during the circle calls are pretty straightforward. It's not really difficult to get them to overlay and resonate and all that. This one's putting us to the test a little bit. So
I was just kidding. I agree.
Of course, yes. Remember, I'm a 5, so no, we don't really. We just go like, that was clever. Very good. All right, so this is my latest Facebook posting.
Nice.
Okay, and I was going to put in 2 more, but then you can't have a picture background. You can only have 3 lines of text and all. But it's kind of okay. People going to like, who am I? I'm an INTPA 5W4 social, double Gemini. Probably screws the whole thing up. By the way, I'm the middle kid, so that's got to affect me somehow. Well, I was raised in an ACOA household, so my father was an alcoholic, and so that dynamic is going on as well. But I do know that in the world of Harry Potter, I'm Ravenclaw. So I'm going like, okay, this is who I am. This is what's all fascinating. Well, if all these things resonate with me, they all have to be variations on me. And so I just want to find out, what do these things have in common? What does one add to the other? And the thing that I thought was really most eye-opening about the Enneagrams was it's, at least initially, seemed to be all about identifying someone's motivators. And I thought that was a unique angle because I was talking to Diane Buffalin, and she's a big fan of the 16PF. Have you guys, anyone familiar with 16PF?
You know it. I'm not an expert
I guess
in
it's been around for a long time, and it's primarily used for pre-employment hiring sorts of things or whatever. And, you know, it's got a whole, obviously it has 16 different dimensions, but each of them are more of a histogram kind of a thing. So it's all fine, fine, fine and dandy. But it's just trying to talk about your suitability for a certain kind of work. And that's one of the challenges I find as I'm looking at these very well vetted psychometric instruments. When we talk about validation, you can't just say that a tool is valid. You have to say it's valid for this particular application, or multiples if you've done the research on each one of them. But it can't just say it's valid in all ways, in all cases, at all times. It's valid for something very specific. Well, one of the criticisms that came across for the Enneagram was that it's almost too amorphous to even begin to do any big validation sorts of studies. And validate it to do what? And so I kind of feel like it's had the same pain I've had with the change grid over all these years, because how do you go about validating a tool where you're defining the activities and it's all based on your perceptions of you at that particular moment in time, and we don't expect it to stay static for hours, let alone for the rest of your life? So, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, so it has heuristic value, et cetera. So point is, this whole thing torments me as that 5. And so here's the question. And Denise, if I'm saying something wrong, you just interrupt me and go from me.
Okay.
The truth is that everybody has some amount, if you will, of each one of these types in their overall makeup. Yep. So one of them tends to end up being expressed most strongly, and those are these 9. And they're arranged equilaterally or equidistantly, whatever the word would be, all the way around a circle. Now, they modified that by saying, well, you also have a contributing factor from your wings. And if we look at the wing that's to your right or the wing that's to your left, or, you know, whatever direction you happen to be going, you can then determine which one of these might be of the second greatest kind of influence in your life. All right. And so if I'm a 9, for example, but my 1 wedge is almost as big as my 9, that's very different than if I'm a 9 and I've got a little bit of a wedge for my 1. Right. And what I'm talking about for wedges, you guys know what I mean when I'm talking about the wedges? This is what I'm talking about. If you go and do the test at Truity, they give you wedges. And so for this particular one, which was Mike, he is most definitely a very strong 8, but his wing would be a 7. But I'd kind of go like, yeah, but look at this gigantic 1 he's got floating over here in this 3. So Denise, that brought up my question though about the wings. Am I more likely to be modified by my largest wing or by my second largest slice of the pie? You have any thoughts on that, Denise?
I would say probably closer to your wing has more influence, but you have a choice to use that influence or open your heart, mind, or gut it for the other ones.
Yeah. Well, let me just ask you this, because I just want to make sure I'm getting the language correct. Are you sure that I have that as a choice, or does it exist as a possibility that I could be totally unaware of? In which case, I wouldn't recognize it as a choice. It could be a blind spot for me, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so that's my thought, is like these small wedges are probably more where those blind spots, or obviously 9 would be Mike's least exercised type that's available to him. But I felt like, well, that 7 is hardly small, but he's got 5 others over here that are bigger than the 7.
Yeah, see, I had a lot of those as well, but my 5 was the strongest. And see, from just understanding how the human body works, that this makes sense to me, because I don't think, and Denise, you can correct me, I don't think this is saying this is who you are. the Enneagram is saying that, hey, these are strong patterns that you have. And the way that we meet any moment from a neuroscience perspective is going to be that strongest synaptic pattern. So we always meet each moment based on something from the past. And that's why I appreciate this kind of information, because saying, okay, yeah, this is what's showing up right now. Now I can say to myself, okay, is it useful or is it non-useful? Can I create some value out of this? But the body metabolizes all our experiences. Mm-hmm. And this is what we're studying in trauma right now, how people have been traumatized and how it shows up in the most inopportune time, because they just never dealt with it, or it was a blind spot to them. You know, as I said, for myself, being around my father who drank a lot, I'm 50, I just turned 53, so I can't still stand the smell of alcohol, period. I just don't like being around it at all. Yeah. And it can trigger things in me. That's from, since I was a young lad. The body keeps the score, exactly, Chris. And that's what that book talks about. Yeah. How we metabolize all of our experiences. And that goes underneath the radar of awareness for us.
Right. Well, I think that the two questions, does this overlay on the change grid, and how does the change grid help this, or where does the change grid fit? I think I can answer the second question. But the first question, I think we're still out on the debate and discussion. Now, if they had said to me before that these are just the 9 types and they're just arranged this way because they're arranged this way, I could let it go. But when someone says to me that the wings are important, what they're saying is that whatever is essential to you, you exist along a continuum that goes both directions circularly. And as you move between an 8 and an, oh no, I don't want to be looking at this one. This is, don't look at some bodies. I just want you to see it. Oh, wait. Don't mind me. That's the actual graphic, but I couldn't get it to be visible. Oh, we'll use this one. So somehow it's saying to me that, I'll start with me as a 5. Well, I could be leaning wing 4 or leaning wing 6. The larger the wedge is, the closer I am, or the more of that wing is present for me. So that means that at a certain point in time, my 5 wing 6 and the 6 wing 5 are going to end up in an exact center place. Are they the same when they are exactly halfway between? Denise, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think, and this is just my understanding, is that if you're Enneagram type 5, that's what you resonate with. You might also resonate with 6 and 8, or 5 and 3 and 9. That would make your wedges larger in those areas.
Yeah.
But even though 4's a wing to you, you might not resonate with it as much, so you don't really have access to it. And that was what you were saying earlier. If I'm not aware of it and I'm not really into the 4 romantic type kind of motivations, then I really don't have access to it.
Interesting.
I think that comment about notion of having access is really, really important. And I think about, I think that's a very powerful concept and needs to be explored. When Brian was talking about trauma earlier, it's possible that, theoretically, a 5 might have a tendency, might have a 4 wing. But depending on life experience and even past trauma might block us from accessing, you can also talk about this positively, but from a negative standpoint, past trauma can actually block us from accessing those parts of ourselves that might enrich us and allow us to move in another direction. So I think that concept of access is a very, very powerful one. I don't know how it fits with the change grid, other than if you think about the capability to access movement toward some kind of or to move towards some kind of goal, and if you're, you know, putting yourself in the heart line going out grid, you have the capability to access more of yourself in order to get there. Does this make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Love it, love
One of
it.
my,
I was thinking about this. I Googled, like, when we were talking about before, how the Enneagram is utilized, and I started Googling different things, Enneagram and wellness, Enneagram and different concepts, and exactly what Kathy described. I'm remembering my experience as a foster parent, right? And so I would go hug the kids. You know, kids are naturally nurturing and those kinds of things, but these kids come from neglect, abandonment, or abuse. And I remember one telling me specifically, it doesn't matter how many times you hug me and say I love you, the same hands that hugged me are the same hands that dealt me a blow that put me in the system.
yeah.
So in other words, it blocked that access that naturally kids have. This guy, he was only 10.
Yep. I like Chris's note, the body keeps score.
Yeah, that's the title of a book.
Yeah.
Hey, T.
Yes, go right ahead.
So here's what I wrestled with this weekend about the Enneagram and the change grid. And then Brian had a great comment about answering the question, if the Enneagram is saying this is a person, right? This is where a person is, versus the change grid is always saying this is where a person is at, location.
Happens.
So if we look at it as a pattern or even as an energy, I think we can map it if we looked at each one of these as just an energy, but it's more challenging because if we look at it, a person is a 5, 6, those are more static, where a pattern is more flexible, more, you know, it can flow different. Or if we just look at them as energies, it can map on a change grid.
Absolutely. And some of them I think really do that. It's about establishing the order and the sequence and finding the logic and the progression. But again, you know, that's my personal torture, and I'm okay having puzzles that take years to sort out. So I'm all right with all that. So that's what I was kind of going like, well, you know, if we can't get this to overlay, but we still see that it's really brilliant. The question is, how do we end up using it? And I think that the answer is getting to what both Kathy and Denise were saying, is that ultimately this awareness, this tool, gives us an indication about what we could be doing, could be working on. And so last time around, I said, maybe what the Enneagram really is the change grid maneuvers. So for example, let's see, Denise, I'll put you a little bit on a spot. Okay, and I'll talk about me because I want to talk about me. Anyone else can do it. You want to be a guinea pig, you just feel free to step up. But this is my question. I know that as a 5, my challenge is about doing things, following through and getting them done. So cultivating this 8 arrow seems to be where my greatest growth could happen. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
Yes, she said hesitatingly. And what I need to avoid.
Do you think that because I'm a 5 also, I have a challenge with doing, not because I don't want to do or can't do. It typically is overwhelmed. And when I looked at the research on procrastination, because I'm definitely not lazy, you know, most tests I've scored on says, you know, I have this high achievement kind of thing. And, you know, I've always had it. But procrastination often starts with overwhelm, if you look at the research. So are you not doing because you're overwhelmed, or because you
that's a 5's, you know, big challenge is that, you know, we're easily overwhelmed.
Got it.
So
yeah,
we want to escape from too much stuff happening all at once. So
and at the low level of an 8, they do not want to have anything to do with weakness. So they pretend as if they're powerful. So it's what's real and what's not real is the level of integration, you know, the healthiness of the person.
And so I could see how I would use this then if I had a client who was a 5, who had all these expectations, all this knowledge, all this whatever, but they weren't satisfied with what they had done with it or where they were in life. I could see like, well, I want to ask them a question on the change grid, but maybe knowing their Enneagram helps me to come up with more, what do I say, efficient ways of them getting to where they want to go, or more natural ways.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean,
I think, again, looking at the levels of development, I think that at the healthiest levels of development for each type, again, that's where you have the most access to energy that is different or expanded than, you know, than what the average level 5 or 1 or 2 or whatever it is.
Yep.
And having that access then allows you situationally on the change grid to move into power. Does that make sense? I mean, that's how it feels to me, because the change grid is situational. The change grid is a moment in time. It's situational. These are longer term developmental patterns that, and as you begin to move through growth, and you could move through growth through the change grid, but
see, and I think that's what you're saying is exactly right, Kathy, that I think of the Enneagram as giving me the general indications about where to put my focus to help someone on their growth path. But sooner or later, that whole growth thing requires an activity list to be created, whether it's in somebody's head or it's on the change grid. There are things that someone needs to do, something to work on. And they could be the perfect list of things for them to work on to get them to wherever it is they really want to go. But I need to know the likelihood they're actually going to follow through and do it. I need to know what's going on with their level of tension. I need to be able to take this overall strategy that I'm getting from the Enneagram and turn it into specific behavioral changes. Or, you know.
Yeah, and what I'm thinking is there, you know, let's just take the doing thing as an example. Is the level of tension around doing, which is completing, you know, the activity list, higher or lower based on these types? So maybe this is highly imperfect, but, you know, an observer is much less motivated to necessarily do or complete the activities on the change grid. Is that the logic there?
Right. And that would also hold true for a 6 and a 7, if I understand it correctly. These 3 tend to have their challenge be about following through and implementing and all that. It's probably because the Epicurean is, you know, seeking the next fun experience or whatever. Maybe they lose
and they're also the head functions, right?
These are all the head functions. Well, I guess the protector, the mediator, and the perfectionist are big time doers.
Right.
But they have their own.
Being a woman, the perfectionist will do at the risk often, and this has been my pattern, it will do something at the risk of violating what I really feel and want and need. Because the compulsion is to move, even though I should have stepped back, I should have stopped, I should have listened, I should have, and it doesn't mean I end up doing the right or the wrong thing. Frequently, you can go either way with that, but at the risk of myself, whereas someone else on a chain on this, in this group, some other type might put themselves and their own needs above doing. So I'm just using that as just one example.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And even for this little 2-sentence thing, it says that a perfectionist energy goes into trying to improve. So sometimes when you try, it doesn't really hit the mark. And sometimes, you know, you got cause to celebrate. So I think that's it. But the energy is going towards trying to keep things in movement, keeping things growing.
Yeah. Yes. Whether it's right or wrong. I mean, whether it's
right. Yep. Denise, thoughts about that you want to throw in?
So I want to take this a little different direction in that there's 3 centers of intelligence. And if we were able to access all 3 centers in our daily life, then we would be having more of a chance to be balanced. Because if I was using my head and my heart and my hands to do things in life or to move through life, then I would be much better off. So when I work with my clients, I always talk about, make sure you remember the heart center. Do you need to have compassion for yourself in order to be able to move forward? Do you need to show compassion for other people? So how much in your life are you using all 3 levels of intelligence? So it's kind of a combination of everything.
Right. And being able to do that would be very centering for somebody. Yeah. By the way, being in the center of the change grid does not mean that you're automatically detached. Remember that sometimes we just pass through 6-6 on our way to someplace else. And so we're at that ground level. It's when we decide to float above the change grid, that's when we're actually detaching from what is happening. So I think you could be at 6-6 and be very much involved in what's going on. Yeah, it's mostly about awareness on the edge of intention, but nevertheless, I think that there's something that's very positive about learning how to move fluidly throughout all of these different ways of using one's mind or finding purpose and motivation. Flexibility is better than rigidity. So I think that's where you end up if you can cultivate these 3. And one
more thing that I could add is that I've always been told to tell people, you are not an Enneagram type 5. You are not an Enneagram type 3.
Yeah.
You are motivated and driven from these passions or vices that particular type is identified with, but you are all types. You just have one type that is more like you, but you're not that type. You're a combination of everything.
Sure. And so the one you're displaying is dictated by what?
By your past, your
motives,
your born qualities, and your experiences through your childhood that have created this conversation in your mind that says, I must perform. I must get out there and do this because that's what I know is going to bring me love and success and whatever.
So is it
I totally agree with that. That is just beautifully said. Thank you.
And how does that change, if it does, based on the situation one finds oneself in? Because again, the situation.
Yeah. I like what Chris mentioned earlier, and that got me to thinking about the energies, because as I read through the graph that you have, it does talk about the energy of each of these. And so I think that it certainly matches up with the grid when we look at the layer that deals with energy. But, when I think about William Bridges' work around transitions, he says that we're always in transition. We're always ending something and moving into a neutral zone and then moving towards that new thing. And so when I think about that in this context, yes, that's why for me, it is fluid, and it is a matter of the disbursement of all of these energies at a given time, in a given situation, whatever that period of transition requires.
Yep. But of course, people are patterns. And so a long habit of experiencing and exhibiting the same pattern gives rise to what we then just label as personality. Right. So that's what your personality is, something that is a way of incorporating all of those patterns into a way that's uniquely you. So, all right, this is all really, really quite fascinating. Let me see if I can throw out a scenario and see how things might change then. So the very first question in the Oracle of the Self is about living the life you want most. So I want all you guys right now to just think about that for just a second. The question is, the activity is living the life you want most. So on a scale of 0 to 12, with 0 being low, 12 being high, how do you rate your ability to live the life you want most? And get your number in your head. And then the second question is, how challenging do you think it is to live the life you want most? So you got your two numbers? Yeah. So everybody just look at the change grid and just get a feel for where you are on the change grid. So anyone want to give us what your numbers were? We can play with this a little bit together. Brian, anybody?
I was at an 8 and a 9.
8 and 9.
Yeah.
So look where 8 and 9 puts him. So he's definitely where? Give me anything you know about where he's
power. He's in power.
He's in power. What else do we know?
Out grid.
He's pretty far out grid. Yep. What else?
Engagement.
He's quite engaged. Look at that, on the brink of engagement. Yep. So very engaged. What else do we know about him?
Analytical driver, or driving analytic?
Yeah, he's on the border between an amiable and an expressive driver right there.
Okay, I couldn't tell. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can't tell. And let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more. But yeah, right there. So, point is, we can kind of describe what's going on, but we all ended up with different coordinates, I'm going to imagine. How would you then say, well, Brian, it seems like you are living the life very close to what you want. Is that true?
Yes, but there's some uncertainties in terms. I always feel like, and I think I said this before, like, I put a lot off after my wife and daughter's accident naturally. So it feels like this point in my life, in my 50s, is all about a return trip, is the best way I classify it.
Yeah, and see, because you said the challenge was slightly higher than your ability to meet the challenge, that means there's still a puzzle to be sorted out. There's still refinements to be made in order to stay hardline. Now, so let's say that I know, okay, so what do we need to work on? And let's say we come up with an activity. I want to know how the knowledge that Brian is a 5-wing 4 might affect the way you are going to help him with this particular situation. And is that different than if he was a 1-wing 2?
That's interesting. So like as a 5, I think one of the chief challenges for me is giving myself time to actually explore. It's always like, the reflection parts of things is a natural thing that I just know to do. And when I don't have time to do it, it always feels like I'm rushing around and like everything is compressed. Like I'm doing it now with these co-author book projects I'm working on.
Yep.
It was put off for the pandemic, and now the publishers, like, they want everyone done by December. So for me, life had moved on since the pandemic, and now it's like, okay, now I have to get my chapters done by December. Now that's putting more competing priorities on things that I otherwise wanted to spend time reflecting and doing. So it always seemed like I always have more on my plate than I have time to deal with, and not enough hours in the day. That's like my experience daily.
Yeah. Yep. And so would someone need to, in order to support you most effectively, is it valuable for them to know that you're a 5-wing 4? So
I would say yes, because that is saying that there's a motive there. There's a motivation there that are at play in this scenario, in this particular situation. Let's see if we can work with them and help devise strategy, because the word strategy itself is always concerned with what happens over time. It's not necessarily automatic. And the way that we can meet moments, at least from my understanding of neuroscience, is we meet it through pathways, either consciousness or automaticity.
Sure.
I think the question that comes to my mind if I ask this is, I would ask Brian or anyone who feels like they're not quite where they want to be is, what are the pressures you are putting on yourself to not that keep you from being where you want to be?
Yeah, see, that's where that achieving come in with this unfinished business. And I read a research report that said people loathe living with regret more so than dying with regret. And that would definitely describe me. I don't like having unfinished business, and I feel like I have unfinished business. But part of that again is, you know, when I set aside things and just totally disconnected after my wife endured this accident. Yeah. So it became a conditioning now, and that's why I feel like, again, it's a return trip.
Interesting. So Denise, any advice on how do you go about using someone's Enneagram with a change grid they might have been filling out? If you can unmute.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
I was eating lunch too.
Oh, no worries. We can relate.
Let's see. So it really is about, you know, what's getting in the way of you being able to do the things that you want to do to create the life that you want. And sometimes the Enneagram helps me have those great questions, knowing what their tendencies are. So what's in the way, i.e., what's the challenge that you have? What resources do you need to bring to the table, kind of thing? Or what do you need to learn? Or where do you need to go to get better at this? That kind of thing. So I don't know. The Enneagram gives me the questions to ask them to think or feel or show me action.
Okay, so I would wonder if I knew that Brian was, okay, look, he's at an 8 and 9, slightly higher than, where do you think you need to be on the change grid to live the life you want most? Where on the change grid would you be if you were living the life you want most?
Would it be 6-6?
That's the debate, because I'm starting to wonder whether or not the life I want to live most depends on my Enneagram type.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and so I may very well say that, well, for me, my perfect life would be, I'm reclusive by nature and I'm okay with that. I have a strong 4 wings, so I'm social enough. And by the way, I'm a 5 wing 4 social, so I do want to be sharing things. And I mean, this whole existence of the circle of brilliance, I think, is evidence of 5 wing 4 social. So, right, Denise, am I right? This is something that 5 wing 4 would do?
I'm not sure.
What?
Say that again. I'm not sure. I don't know it.
Okay.
Say that again.
Okay, a 5 wing 4 social. So likes to really know stuff, understand things, you know, I get that, but they don't want to keep it for themselves, which would be a self-preservation person. A social person wants to share it with others.
The other interesting component, and I apologize, Denise, for stepping in here, is the notion of uniqueness that goes with the 4.
With the 4. Yeah. And, you know, I think they describe a 5 wing 4 as being an iconoclast. I think you guys have heard me say this before, that the sheer fact that someone has done X before is the only reason I need to not do X. So I'll look for anything else. So if someone says that they believe that X is true, my mind automatically goes to, well, perhaps it is, but perhaps it isn't. So let's dig around a little bit. Let's, you know, whatever. But I would say, like, do I need to no, I'm going to go back to Brian's things. He's only slightly above where he would probably want to chart. So Brian, again, the life you want to live most as a 5 is what? What do you want in your life? What do you want? What's the which, by the way, this is the second question in the oracle itself, is defining what I want in the life, most in my life. So one of the biggest reasons people aren't living it is because they've never given any thought to what that really looks like. What does that mean? So.
Yeah, for me, it's really about, it's putting the piece of the puzzle together, really. I have all the components there because it'll be doing the work that I set out to do before my wife and daughter's accident. Because I always, like, every decade I give myself a theme and then reverse engineer it annually. And so that really was about going out. I'm doing this. My passion project is global healthcare equivalency, which is looking at all the technologies that we have out there and how it doesn't make sense to me that anyone anywhere on the planet should not have access to not just healthcare, but quality healthcare.
Amen.
And so I'm talking about this idea of productizing health services to where people have access no matter where they live and what condition they're in.
All right.
And so partnering with all these like World Health Organizations, things that my father did, traveling, speaking about it, those are the kinds of things I was setting out to do that I kind of put on hold for like 10 years, I think, since the accident.
Now it's time to get back into that.
Yeah, because it seems like there's enough pressure to do it. When I think about, like South Africa right now, I just turned 53, and what a lot of people don't realize is South Africa, Nigeria, these kinds of countries are atypical in that they have a growing middle class. So I was explaining to someone earlier today, there's some challenges that come with that. One of is lifestyle through urbanization. So non-communicable disease like diabetes is the second leading cause of death for citizens under 60. That's incredible to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
So helping to solve those kinds of things, that to me would be part of that life that I want to live, because it doesn't make sense that people don't have access to that.
And so it goes back to the question is, how could we go about using the change grid with someone that incorporates at least the knowledge of their Enneagram into the work that we're doing? And so how about if I say that for Thursday, I'm going to reach out to, I don't know, whoever wants to volunteer and say, I'd like to do a demonstration. And let's see if someone can actually come to us with a real situation like our clients would come to us with. And then let's see what we can do to incorporate the knowledge of their Enneagram into the kind of work that we would be doing with them. Thoughts about that? Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Hey, T,
right. Yep.
Real quick, let me share something with you about remember I sent the link to you about a daily planner for the Enneagram.
Oh yeah.
So tough to say, I was identified as 6, right? So on the daily planner for the Enneagram, there are 2 areas, and this goes back to what Kathy was talking about, maneuvers, I believe, earlier. So how they approach helping a 6 Enneagram in their daily planning, let me read to you, 3 areas. Number 1, this is what they're sharing with you. You are capable of making significant decisions. The second thing they share as a reminder is you can trust your insights and abilities. The third area, how can I serve others? By providing stability, remaining productive, creating a safe and trusting environment, lending a helping hand, and sharing positive feedback. This is the document. So they have one for each Enneagram type. And
can we ask, where did you find the daily planner? Oh, that's what Denise just chatted. Yes.
It was a Facebook post. What I can do is I'll email it to you, T. I'll email it to you, and if you can email it to the team, unless I could quickly, because I don't think I could post it in the chat. Can I?
Yeah, if it's a link.
Give me one quick sec. Well, no, it's an actual PDF.
No, just drag the PDF file directly into the chat window, and everyone will get it.
All right, give me one moment.
All right. Oh, yeah, I am finding this absolutely fascinating and frustrating at the same time. Welcome to the madness that is me. So, yeah.
You know, it's interesting because as an introvert, and what were your Enneagram numbers?
I'm a 5 wing 4 social.
You are so verbal and so out there, and I know it's an effort for you, but how do you explain that?
Well, I do think that what the description about a 5 wing 4 is absolutely true, that I am a person who's in my mind, but I'm very creative. I'm looking for something that's unique and distinct. And, I love that kind of stuff. So this is definitely me. And the idea that I'm a test to be a social makes sense too, because I want to share what it is that I have. And
Yeah.
I don't believe that anything that I have is 100% right. I think that a lot of the things we've talked about over all these years are darn close, but I'm always open to integrating more things. That's why the circle of brilliance even exists, so we can have these kinds of conversations. So I think that's very consistent with what's going on. My challenge, my area of growth is to develop 8. That's where my growth opportunity is, which is all about following through and getting it done and being the entrepreneur and making all that kind of happen. And what I have to watch out for is when I'm in stress, I fall into this 7 type, the low levels of development of the 7 type. So just seeking whatever escape you can by keeping yourself busy doing something, So remember you talked about before that activity and productivity are dramatically different things. So I can be very active and doing all kinds of things to escape whatever it is. But I really need to be focusing on the 8. I don't know if that answered the question, but I felt compelled like I had to do something with it. Or I had an opportunity, or I'd be stupid if I didn't try to do something with it.
Yep.
Before
we go, if I could just let Chris know, I tried to double click on that Enneagram Daily Planner and nothing comes up.
Yeah, I emailed it to T to see if he can do it because I was trying to do it from the PDF and it wouldn't.
I'll just also Google it too and see if I can find it because I couldn't get it either.
Yeah.
Just emailed it to T.
Yeah, that's good. No, I'll make sure that I distribute it to everybody one way or another. Okay,
so
good.
Anyway. I just want to throw one more thing out there because you were talking about you. And the thing is, you're 5 with a 4 wing, and that you have a tendency to be curious, which is a virtue of the thinking center. Mm-hmm. And you have a tendency also to be compassionate, which is the big virtue of the heart center. Mm. And when I talk about the gut center or the hand center, I talk about people adding courage to their life, courage to go do something. So if you think about what's missing, those are the 3 different virtues that I ask people around questions, like how do you get to the 8, 9, and 1?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that worked, by the way. I was able to get it.
Oh, good. Yeah, I see this link works.
I didn't even, but here's the funny thing. I didn't purchase it. I signed up and they sent it to me as soon as I put in my email address before I even purchased it. Because I was going to purchase it just to see it, but they sent it.
Well, what we received was the way to buy it.
Yeah, but that's the initial link I went in. But if you just put when I put my email address in and I didn't purchase it, they sent it anyway. I think they automatically send it before you complete the process.
Okay. So they just want you on your mailing list.
I'm on the billing sheet right now.
Interesting. All right. Okay. Well, we've gone over for today. We'll pick up where we left off. I think we need to do the demo, and then that should help us to see how we can integrate these. I don't mind sharing with you that I was starting to wonder if there's one psychometric tool that kind of resonates with the change grid most effectively, however you want to define that. And so my hope was that the Enneagram could well be that. But I continue to go back to, I've never taken a personality test that I didn't think was right. So yeah, anyway, so just have to kind of sort through where does it all fit in? How do things fit together? But I do like this one a lot. All right, with that, thanks everybody for joining in. We'll talk again soon. Bye for now.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.